Welcome back to the Explainer. So, you look up at a massive commercial jetliner and you gotta wonder, what happens when things go catastrophically wrong? Most people think surviving a massive engine failure is just a matter of luck. But I'm here to show you that it's actually not a game of chance at all. It's a rigid, completely fascinating battle of physics, aerodynamics, and mathematics. A battle that modern aircraft are meticulously engineered to win. Today, we're breaking down the anatomy of an emergency. All right, let's dive right into this. Our flight plan for today traces a worst-case scenario. We're going to hit the V1 takeoff decision, the anatomy of an engine failure, the aerodynamics of asymmetry, redundancy in the rat, and finally, stabilization and diversion.
Starting right off with Part 1, the V1 takeoff decision.
Picture this. You're sitting in the cockpit. You've got over 300 tons of aircraft around you, the throttles are jammed forward, and that runway is disappearing beneath you incredibly fast. This is it, the absolute most energy-heavy critical phase of the whole flight. Now imagine a loud bang. The whole airframe shudders. An explosive failure happens right at your absolute maximum runway speed. So what do? The margins here are literally razor thin. And let me tell you, human processing time, that's a luxury you just don't have. And that brings us to V1. You've probably heard it called the takeoff decision speed. But honestly, that's kind of a myth. V1 is an action speed. The actual brain-powered choice to continue or abort, that was made in the briefing room way before you even release the brakes. V1 is a rigid, mathematical boundary. Standard operating procedure actually dictates that the second the V1 callout happens, the flying pilot literally takes their hands entirely off the thrust levers. Why? Because you have to neutralize that sheer human instinct to slow down. Now, if things go wrong before V1, you're executing a high-speed abort. It is a brutal, purely mechanical reality. The sequence has to be flawless. You're slamming thrust levers to idle, deploying speed brakes to kill the lift and force weight onto the wheels, and then hitting maximum reverse thrust and max manual braking. It's violent, but it has to be precise, because if you hesitate for even a single second at 150 knots, you just ate up another 225 meters of pavement. But what if you pass V1? Well, you have no choice. You are taking that broken engine into the sky. Which leads us to Part 2, the anatomy of the engine failure itself. Let's totally freeze time for a second and zoom right inside that engine casing as we leave the runway. The FAA certification rules are actually incredibly wild. When a compressor fan blade snaps or, say, a massive bird gets sucked in, like what happened on the Miracle on the Hudson, the engine isn't magically expected to survive. It's going to die. To pass certification, the absolute core requirement is just that it doesn't explode into bits and rain metal down on the ground. These jet engines aren't indestructible, they are just masterfully engineered to contain their own destruction. And for decades, keeping that explosion contained meant relying on pure brute force. We're talking massive, solid steel containment rings just to stop a broken blade from firing out like a missile and piercing the fuselage, or worse, severing your hydraulic lines. Just one of those steel rings added 410 pounds of dead weight to a single engine. But today, engineering has totally shifted from hardwall to softwall containment. Instead of heavy steel just trying to deflect the shrapnel, modern jets use layered aramide fiber and Kevlar composites. Guys, it's literally a bulletproof vest wrapped around the engine. So when a titanium fan blade snaps off at 25,000 RPM, it hits this soft wall, the fabric stretches, expands, and completely swallows the high-speed debris, keeping it safely trapped inside the housing.
All right, Part 3, the aerodynamics of asymmetry.
Okay, so the engine didn't tear the plane apart, which is great. But now we have a huge problem. It's not producing thrust anymore. As you accelerate with one dead engine, the live engine is violently trying to push the nose off to one side. On the runway, pilots are dealing with VMCG, minimum control ground, where they basically stomp on the rudder to stay on the center line. But the exact split second those wheels leave the pavement, you lose nose wheel steering, the aerodynamic rules completely rewrite themselves, and you enter VMCA, minimum control air. At this point, you're in a literal physical fight with aerodynamic forces. To keep control of the plane, certification actually assumes the pilot is going to bank exactly 5 degrees toward the live engine. It is this crazy, delicate balancing act. That slight 5-degree bank creates a lateral lift vector, and that fights the asymmetric yaw pushing against you. Basically, it dramatically reduces how much rudder you have to muscle in to keep the plane flying straight. But hey, flying straight is just half the battle. You have to climb. And the math here, totally unforgiving. Pilots absolutely must hit V2, the optimal engine outclimb speed.
It's a strict, hard floor. Back in 1979, American Airlines Flight 191 tragically lost an engine and slat hydraulics, which pushed their stall speed way up. When they slowed down to their target V2 of 159 knots, the wing completely stalled, rolling the plane. It was a tragic lesson. Today, V2 is a regulatory minimum, and a twin-engine jet has to hit a 2.4% net climb gradient. Plus, to make sure they don't smack into a mountain while climbing out so slowly, they fly what's called a pre-calculated engine-out SID, or escape route. And get this, below 400 feet, the cockpit is completely sterile. They will literally ignore air traffic control to prioritize the physics of surviving the climb.
Moving on to Part 4, redundancy and the rat.
So you're climbing. The asymmetric thrust is under control, but what if things get worse? What if you lose both engines and all your normal electrical and hydraulic power vanishes with them? Well, enter the absolute unsung hero of aviation safety, the ram air turbine, or the rat. It's this little deployable wind-driven fan. When you lose primary power, this thing drops out into the slipstream and converts the oncoming wind right into emergency power. It's the exact piece of technology that made the Miracle on the Hudson survivable. The way the rat works is just brilliantly fail-safe. If the AC electrical system goes dark, the plane's logic knows it's in serious trouble. A spring-loaded latch releases automatically, meaning it doesn't even need electrical power to deploy. Gravity and springs just drop the rat right out of the belly of the plane. The sheer force of the wind hits it, the turbine spins up, and boom, it instantly starts pressurizing the hydraulic lines. It quite literally breathes life back into the dead fly-by-wire flight controls so the pilots can actually steer.
To put that little fan into perspective, check out this number: 120 kilometers. Back in 2001, an Air Transat A330 had a massive fuel leak and a dual-engine flameout right over the Atlantic Ocean. By using only the RAT to power their flight controls and basic instruments, those pilots successfully glided a massive airliner 120 kilometers and landed safely on a remote island. Absolutely wild.
Which brings us to Part 5, stabilization and diversion. Whether you're chugging along on one engine or dead-stick gliding on the rat, this final phase is all about getting this crippled bird onto some pavement. And here's the thing, pilots are never ever just guessing where to go. It's all completely mapped out. If an engine dies at cruise, you do a drift down, trading altitude for distance. An A320 with 0 engines can glide for about 90 miles. But what if you're over the middle of the ocean? Well, that's governed by ETOPS, or EDTO rules, Extended Diversion Time Operations. Even halfway across the Pacific, you are trapped in a mathematical net. A twin-engine plane must always remain within a maximum time frame from a suitable airport, like 180 or 240 minutes, and that's specifically calculated based on your single-engine flying speed.
Then comes the final descent. It is a masterful balancing act. If you're on the rat, you absolutely have to respect your minimum airspeed, usually around 140 knots. If you fly too slow, there isn't enough wind to spin the turbine. The rat stalls, and you lose all flight controls just seconds before touchdown. Plus, because you've got a dead engine or a rat hanging out, your drag is massive. To manage all that energy, pilots will delay extending the flaps and landing gear until the very last second. And of course, since you probably don't have thrust reverses or full anti-skid brakes, you really have to anticipate severely degraded braking once those wheels hit.
So from those unyielding kinematic boundaries of V1 to Kevlar-wrapped engines, to the sheer fail-safe brilliance of the ram air turbine, surviving an emergency in the sky is definitely not a game of luck. It is purely a matter of brilliant, uncompromising engineering. Knowing the rigid, invisible math that guarantees your safety every single time you fly, will you ever look at an airplane the exact same way again? Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep learning, and I'll see you on the next one.